All right, guys, back to the table, 1776 or bust. And on my table, you see this little charming firearm from a company called Rock Island Armory. Now, for those of you who say, wow, that looks very familiar to other handguns, you'd be right, because this actually is very, very similar, if not identical, if not a clone, of guns from Tanfoglio, EAA. You can even say the IWI Jericho, and of course, the Magnum Research Baby Desert Eagle 3. Now, of course, a lot of these guns have some slight differences that make it uniquely theirs. In this case, you see that Rock Island Armory has their badge on the top, which is kind of a nice little touch. It's not too overly dramatic, which I think is nice, very simplistic, because a lot of people don't want Rock Island Armory over the slide, so they put a little insignia there, which is kind of nice. And on the other side, it just tells you where it is made. So yes, this is a gun made in the Philippines. And, you can see your barrel, stainless barrel that says caliber 9mm. And then, of course, it does say some things on the top, 9mm caliber. And, of course, the map. Let's see if I can get that to zoom in. Good luck with that. But you can see that it says the type of series, which is the Mapp series. And this is their mid-size gun. And it's a 9mm, as I've said before. And the mid-size gun, basically what that is, you have a 3.6-inch barrel, but you have a full-size grip. So it's very similar to something that you would call, let's say, a 19X or a Glock 45 or whatever you want to call it. Now, in regards to the handgun, it is a polymer-framed handgun. You can get these in steel, where you can actually remove the side plates or the grip plates or whatever you want to call them, and you can replace them, put some really cool things, custom stuff on there, and that's kind of nice too. I think that's a nice feature. Now, obviously, you can see the safety looks really, really similar to other guns that you may say, like, let's say, for example, a CZ. Now, obviously, this has a decocker and not a safety. But for those of you out there who own some 75Bs, you're going to notice that safety looks really familiar. Because let's be honest, CZ has a design that has been basically duplicated throughout the world and has been sold under different licenses of handguns, like Canic, TriStar, EAA Tanfoglio, IWI, and, of course, Magnum Research. Now, in regards to the gun, there are some positives and some negatives. Again, that's normal. Every gun has them except for Steyr. Just kidding. But what you're going to have to realize, guys, is that you're going to have to take this for what it's worth. It is a budget gun. So because it is for the budget-conscious person, there aren't going to be a lot of bells and whistles. You probably won't find a tremendous amount of aftermarket. You may not even find a tremendous amount of parts for the handgun if something was to go wrong. However, in this case, that's not the case, because this is such a duplicated gun around the world. There's always going to be parts for it, and you can find them fairly easily. Now, in regards to some of the features of the handgun, the stippling isn't overly aggressive. The texturing on the side is okay. I like this texturing. Not so keen on this. I don't really understand the point of that. It's really soft and kind of smooth, but this one is fairly aggressive. Now, the rear on the back strap, I'm going to see if I can get this to zoom in. But this back strap is fairly effective, and I like how it actually cuts up a little bit more. So when it's sitting in the web of your hand, it actually feels fairly comfortable, but at the same time, very controllable. Again, you can see the same type of texturing in the front. So when you do have your hand on the gun doesn't really rub your raw in regards to your hands or your love handles. And better yet, it actually feels pretty good in your hand. And it's a very controllable handgun with very controllable recoil, but a lot of that has to do also with that beaver tail, which again is very similar to what you would find on a CZ or any of the other guns that I mentioned. Now, in regards to your takedown / slide lock / slide release, again, looks very similar to what you would find on a Jericho, obviously a Magnum Research as well, and of course very similar to things you'd see on TriStars and CZs. As a matter of fact, you can see almost a slight similarity between the one on my P01 and the one that's on the Mapp. It's just slightly different. Like I said, they're going to make it the way they want it for their particular brand. Now, because it is a budget gun, what you're going to have to also face is the fact that you can't really do much with the sights. While you do have kind of a left to right adjustable slot or sight in the rear, and it is kind of a low profile type sight, non-snaggable, that kind of stuff. You're going to notice though that that front is actually a part of the slide. So you cannot remove that front sight, which might be good, might be bad. But again, remember, it's a budget gun. So somebody who's looking for this is looking for their first gun, who's looking for a good deal and something they can actually use. I mean, you certainly don't want to pay $350 for a handgun that doesn't work, because that's bad. So I can vouch for the fact that this one actually works, and it works fairly well. Now, in regards to the takedown, again, I'm not going to take down the gun because if you've seen a takedown mechanism on a CZ or any of those other guns that I mentioned, it's identical, guys. So basically, excuse me, if you like, you can put it in half-cock position, and then you're going to notice, you see those little 2 dots towards the rear right by the hammer? 1, 2. You just need to line those up. That's it. Line them up. And then when you line them up, you're going to push out the pin here, and it's going to pop out the side. And then you can take the slide off without having to pull the trigger. And then it has its recoil spring, again, identical to what you'd find inside of a CZ. And it's got a nice stainless barrel. Very nice barrel. Now, parkerized slide. So again, you're going to have nice corrosion resistance. So it's going to be a pretty solid handgun in regards to that field. And I think overall, for about $350 and change, it's actually a pretty good gun. I mean, I was fairly surprised about how good of quality this gun really was. Now, again, you have your Picatinny rail on the front. Again, not too long, not too short, but it's still functional. You have 2 little slots there. So, I mean, that's fairly good. Again, when the safety is actuated, I'll just pull the, I got to do that again. Sorry, guys. So I just did the oopsie, but I fixed that right away. So I did pull the hammer back, and you'll notice that the trigger is completely dead. Doesn't move. It's just locked in place when this safety is on. Now, there is one downside to this safety that I found. Now, if you're pulling your gun and you're sweeping your thumb, it is easy to deactivate the safety. Again, you have a fairly good ledge for your thumb to rest on, so you don't necessarily have a problem with that. You can definitely lean that thumb on there for a nice little purchase on the handgun. But the one thing that I did notice, excuse me, that I didn't necessarily care for in this handgun was the putting back on of the safety. It was almost impossible to do. I can't do it with my right hand. Now, that could just be me. Could mean that I have a bad thumb. I don't know what it is, but I just couldn't actuate it with my actual, strong hand. So I had to use my support hand to put it back on, which I don't really know if I'm fancy on. And it could just be that it is a new gun, so it's a little bit more difficult to actuate the safety on and off because it's not broken in, which is always a possibility. Trigger-wise, now that's, of course, the big question. How does the trigger feel? Well, I'll be honest with you. The double action trigger on this bad boy is heavy. Interestingly enough, though, it might be heavy, but it is not a very long and heavy trigger. And what I mean by that is I measured this in at 16 pounds. That's a ridiculously heavy trigger, especially in double action. Now, interestingly enough, when you get into that half-cocked position where it is right now, it's still a pretty heavy trigger, but it breaks at a very nice spot. It's not actually all the way back. It's about 3/4 of the way back where the hammer finally drops. And I do like that feature because it actually makes it feel a little bit lighter than 16 pounds. Now, in regards to the single action, I'm not going to lie, guys. The single action is fantastic on this handgun. There's your take-up right there, and there's no wiggle room. It just breaks, and it's a solid feeling single action trigger. As a matter of fact, and again, I think this has to do with the fact that this is a safety only and my CZs are all decockers. I think this single action on here is actually better than here, which is interesting. But again, that has something to do, I think, with the decocker versus the safety. A little more parts, less parts, smoother trigger pull. I mean, overall, if you're looking for a budget gun, this is a pretty decent deal. You know, there are, again, going to be some people out there who say, well, you know, for $350 and change, I could probably find something a little bit better. And don't get me wrong, guys, you know, there are guns out there that are really high quality that you can find for $350 and up. But this is another option. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with having those options, especially if you're looking for something with that hammer and that single double action. And you don't mind carrying with decocker only, or excuse me, safety only. Now, again, this is just one of many types of guns like this. I was fortunate enough to have them send this to me. But again, like I said, I'm not going to lie to you and say this gun was 100% perfect because it wasn't. I actually had 2 little problems with this handgun when I was shooting it, and I actually had 2 double feeds in this gun. Now, I shot 250 rounds that day, and out of the 250 rounds, I had 2 problems. That was it. Now, some might say that's not a very good average, but at the same time, it could be anything that caused that. It could be dirt. It could be lack of lubrication. Because again, I did not clean the gun or lube it before I went out and took it. I just went out and shot it. So it could be a number of things. So does that mean that this gun is a no-go? I don't think so. I think you got to put a couple more 100 rounds through it to really see if it's a problematic issue. But at this point, I couldn't say that it is or isn't. I would just say that it just might be a fluke. It just could be any number of issues. You'd really just have to test this out more and find out. But again, for 350 bucks, is it a winner? I think it is. I think it's a good, solid competitor in that price range, especially if you're looking something that has a lot of decent features, but yet not overly done, especially at an affordable price. And again, that necessarily won't cost you as much as this. Overall, I think Rock Island Armory has hit a lot of high parts on this. But again, keep in mind, this is a very, very nice handgun made by many different manufacturers. And in this case, I think Rock Island Armory did a nice job. You know, even with the slide being kind of beveled. Oh my God, I'm pointing it at the camera. You know, again, very smooth slide. It's very easy to grab onto the slide serrations here in the back. And I think that's a really nice feature. You know, it's not that difficult to get a hold of them. So again, really solid handgun. Really love that 4-pound single action trigger. It is just such a nice, crisp, clean trigger. And there's a lot of things going for this little handgun that costs $350 if you choose to buy one. So I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. I mean, is this a gun that you would consider buying? Do you have any experience with these types of handguns, whether it's this one or a 10 Foglio or an EAA? I would like to hear what you have to say, because I think these are decent handguns for decent prices. And honestly, you know what? If you're really looking for a budget-friendly handgun because you can't go out and buy that, you know, $1,200 handgun, then go for it. I mean, you can't go wrong. I'd rather have you use something like this than something like nothing. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thumbs up if you like. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Also, click that bell so you know when I release videos. And I appreciate you watching. I hope you guys have a great night. Stay safe. And as always, freedom is never free.